What if the reason people don't respect you has nothing to do with your achievements, status, or appearance? Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in ancient Rome, discovered that true respect comes from mastering 11 specific psychological principles that trigger automatic admiration in others. These 2,000-year-old techniques are so powerful that modern psychology is just now catching up to what the Stoics knew all along. And today, you'll learn exactly how to apply each one to command instant respect in any situation. Subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and comment where in the world you're watching from, because now I'm going to tell you everything. Have you ever had that sinking feeling of sharing an important idea in a meeting, only to have someone else repeat it minutes later to widespread acclaim? Or perhaps you've experienced the subtle sting of being talked over repeatedly, as though your voice was somehow less deserving of attention. Maybe you've felt that peculiar invisibility that comes when you enter a room and people's eyes seem to look past you rather than at you. If any of these scenarios feel familiar, you're experiencing something far more significant than mere social discomfort. You're confronting one of humanity's most fundamental struggles, the universal quest for respect. What makes this struggle so fascinating is that it isn't just your personal challenge. It's a thread that runs through the human experience across time, culture, and social position. Recent research reveals something startling. 76% of professionals report feeling frequently disrespected in workplace interactions, while 82% believe this lack of respect has directly impacted their career advancement. Even more revealing, a comprehensive study found that perceived disrespect ranks higher than compensation as a reason people leave their jobs. But this isn't just about work. The same patterns appear in our personal relationships, where feeling disrespected consistently ranks among the top 3 reasons for relationship breakdown across cultures and demographics. Think about that for a moment. More relationships end because of disrespect than infidelity or financial problems. Take a moment right now and recall the last time you felt genuinely disrespected. Notice how that memory still produces a physical response. Perhaps tension in your shoulders, a slight quickening of your breath, or a subtle warming of your face. That's not coincidental. The experience of disrespect triggers a neurobiological threat response almost identical to physical danger. Medical research has linked chronic experiences of disrespect to elevated cortisol levels, impaired cognitive performance, and even compromised immune function. When we're not respected, we're not just unhappy, we're literally less healthy. One fascinating study found that people who regularly experience workplace disrespect have immune function comparable to those experiencing significant sleep deprivation. What's most interesting is that this struggle isn't new. Behind the marble busts and impressive titles, history's most influential leaders fought the same battle for genuine respect that you're facing today. Consider Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome at the height of its power. You might imagine that commanding the most powerful empire in the world would automatically guarantee respect. Yet in his private journals, later published as meditations, Marcus wrote repeatedly about his frustration when advisors would nod politely at his guidance, only to ignore it completely. He developed specific techniques to command genuine respect rather than mere obedience. Or take Seneca, who advised emperors and accumulated enormous wealth. Despite his accomplishments, he documented his struggle to be taken seriously as a philosopher rather than just a politically connected rich man. He created conversational methods specifically designed to earn authentic respect rather than the false deference people showed to his position. Perhaps most relevant is Epictetus. Born a slave before becoming one of history's most respected philosophers, he understood what it meant to start from a position where respect was explicitly denied. His methods for gaining respect regardless of social position prove these principles work across all social boundaries. These weren't just philosophers theorizing about respect. They were human beings developing practical solutions to the very problem you're facing right now. When we feel disrespected, we typically misdiagnose the problem. We think, if I were more accomplished, more confident, more charismatic, then people would respect me. This creates an endless cycle of seeking external validation that never fully satisfies. I'd like you to try something right now. Take a moment and list mentally all the things you believe would make others respect you more. Perhaps it's a promotion, a degree, weight loss, or a relationship status. Got that list? Now ask yourself, do you know people who have those exact things who still struggle to receive respect? The answer is almost certainly yes. This reveals the fundamental misconception about respect. The Stoics discovered a counterintuitive truth. Respect isn't primarily earned through achievements or social techniques. It emanates from something far more fundamental: your relationship with yourself. Modern psychological research confirms this ancient insight. In a landmark study on interpersonal perception, researchers found that 93% of how we're perceived by others is established within the first 4 minutes of interaction. And most of that impression comes from non-verbal cues that signal our self-relationship. This explains why some people with modest achievements command immediate respect, while others with impressive credentials struggle to be taken seriously. The difference isn't what they've accomplished, it's how they carry themselves through the world. Let me share a personal example. Years ago, I worked with 2 colleagues with identical job titles and similar backgrounds. One commanded immediate attention when speaking, while the other was frequently interrupted and overlooked. The difference wasn't their knowledge or position, it was that the respected colleague had developed what the Stoics would call internal sovereignty, a relationship with himself that didn't depend on others' validation. The Stoics developed a comprehensive system for earning genuine respect that works across contexts and centuries because it addresses the root cause rather than symptoms. Their approach wasn't about manipulating others' perceptions through social techniques or power plays. Instead, they focused on cultivating internal qualities that naturally command respect without demanding it. This distinction is crucial. Most advice about gaining respect focuses on external behaviors, speaking louder, interrupting others, adopting power poses. These techniques might create temporary compliance, but they rarely generate authentic respect. In fact, they often achieve the opposite, creating resentment and resistance. The Stoic approach works differently. By focusing on your internal relationship with respect, how you respect yourself, how you process disrespect from others, and how you establish boundaries, you trigger a fundamental shift in how others perceive and treat you. Let's do a quick experiment to demonstrate this principle. Think about someone you genuinely respect, not someone you fear or envy, but truly respect. What qualities make you respect them? When I ask this question in workshops, the answers are remarkably consistent. Integrity, calm under pressure, clarity of purpose, consistent principles. Notice that none of these are external achievements. They're all internal qualities that manifest externally. The Stoics understood this intuitively. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Be your own master and look at things as a man, as a human being, as a citizen, as a mortal creature." He recognized that true respect begins with how we govern ourselves. Before we explore specific techniques, I want to help you understand your current relationship with respect. Take 30 seconds right now to complete this quick inventory in your mind. When do you feel most disrespected? With which people or in which situations do you find yourself seeking approval? When do you compromise your values or suppress your thoughts to be liked? How do you typically respond when someone dismisses or interrupts you? This brief reflection establishes your baseline, the starting point of your journey toward commanding genuine respect. Over the next several chapters, you'll learn 11 specific techniques derived from Stoic wisdom that you can implement immediately, whether you're heading into a work meeting, dealing with difficult family members, or meeting someone new. You'll understand exactly why your past attempts to gain respect haven't produced lasting results, and you'll have a clear roadmap for transforming how others perceive and respond to you, not through manipulation, but through authentic personal transformation. Most importantly, you'll experience the profound freedom that comes when your sense of worth no longer depends on others' validation, while paradoxically receiving more genuine respect than ever before. This isn't about becoming someone else. It's about becoming more fully yourself in a way that naturally commands respect. And it begins with understanding the fundamental principle that the Stoics discovered centuries ago: true respect starts within. I want to emphasize something important. This approach works regardless of your current position or circumstances. When Epictetus developed these principles, he was a slave, someone systematically denied respect by the very structure of his society. Yet he ultimately became so respected that even the emperor sought his wisdom. If these techniques could work for someone starting from absolute social disadvantage, they can certainly work for you. The cost of not addressing this issue extends far beyond momentary discomfort. Research shows that consistently experiencing disrespect doesn't just feel bad, it fundamentally alters your ability to perform at your best. A fascinating study found that even mild social rejection activates the same brain regions as physical pain, creating a cognitive tax that reduces intellectual performance by up to 30%. In other words, when you're not respected, you literally cannot think as clearly or perform as effectively. This creates a downward spiral where diminished performance further reduces respect. By contrast, when you implement the techniques you'll learn, you create an upward spiral. As you begin to command more genuine respect, your cognitive resources free up, allowing you to perform better, which naturally generates more respect. Before we dive into the first and most powerful Stoic technique in our next chapter, I want to address a common concern. Some people worry that focusing on gaining respect might be somehow selfish or egotistical. The Stoics would strongly disagree. They saw appropriate respect as essential to human flourishing and to contributing your best to the world. Epictetus put it clearly: make it your study then to confront every harsh impression with the words, "You are but an impression, and not at all what you seem to be." In modern terms, we might say, don't let disrespect define you or limit your contribution. When you command genuine respect, you're able to share your ideas, influence important decisions, and contribute your unique perspective. This isn't just about your personal satisfaction. It's about ensuring your gifts aren't lost to the world because of easily correctable patterns in how you relate to yourself and others. As we conclude this chapter, I want you to remember the fundamental insight that will guide everything that follows. The respect you've been seeking from others has always been yours to give to yourself first. The Stoics discovered that when you shift your focus from earning external validation to cultivating internal sovereignty, you trigger a transformation that others can feel immediately. Imagine that you could have absolute clarity about what's truly under your control and what isn't. The Stoics discovered that this simple distinction is the foundation of all genuine respect. It's what they called the dichotomy of control, a tool so powerful that when Epictetus first taught it, his students were incredulous at its simplicity. Let's discover how this technique can instantly transform how you're perceived by others. The technique that changed everything for Epictetus works like this. Imagine drawing two circles on a piece of paper. In the inner circle, place everything that's completely within your control. In the outer circle, everything that isn't. This simple distinction, what the Stoics called the dichotomy of control, is perhaps the most powerful tool for earning genuine respect ever developed. Take a moment right now and think about the last time you felt disrespected. Maybe someone interrupted you during a meeting, or perhaps a friend dismissed your concern about something important to you. Notice how much energy you spent trying to change their behavior or win their approval. How did that work out for you? Here's what the Stoics discovered. When we focus on making others respect us, we paradoxically become less respectable. It's like trying to fall asleep by forcing yourself to sleep. The harder you try, the more impossible it becomes. Marcus Aurelius learned this lesson early in his reign as emperor. In his personal journals, he describes how he initially tried to please everyone in the Roman Senate, changing his opinions to match theirs and seeking their approval. The result? They saw him as weak and indecisive, the exact opposite of respectable. "I cannot control whether they find me worthy of respect," he wrote, "only whether I am worthy of respect." This insight transformed his approach. Instead of focusing on winning approval, he concentrated solely on acting according to his principles, regardless of others' reactions. Let's break down the dichotomy of control as it applies specifically to respect. What's in your control? Your values, your responses, your boundaries, your principles, and how you treat others. What's not in your control? Others' opinions of you, their moods, whether they interrupt you, if they give you credit for your ideas, or whether they acknowledge your contributions. This distinction seems simple, but applying it consistently creates a profound shift in how others perceive you. Think about people you deeply respect. Do they seem desperate for your approval? Or do they operate from internal principles regardless of external validation? Almost certainly the latter. I want you to try something right now. Take a deep breath and mentally list 3 recent situations where you felt disrespected. For each one, classify the elements as either within your control or outside it. Be brutally honest with yourself. For example, if a colleague took credit for your idea, what was in your control? Your preparation, your clarity in presenting the idea initially, and your response when they claimed it as their own. What wasn't in your control? Their decision to take credit and others' immediate reactions. Modern psychological research confirms what the Stoics intuited. A fascinating study on leadership perception found that leaders who demonstrated outcome independence, caring deeply about process but detaching from others' reactions, were rated 34% higher on measures of respect than those who visibly sought approval. I've seen this principle transform how people are treated in remarkable ways. Imagine a software developer, let's call her Emma, who qualified everything she said in meetings with phrases like, "I think maybe," and "I could be wrong, but wrong." Despite her technical brilliance, she was constantly interrupted and overlooked. When she began implementing the dichotomy of control, focusing exclusively on delivering her best analysis, regardless of how people might receive it, something remarkable happened. She eliminated hedging language, spoke more confidently about what she knew to be true, and stopped emotionally reacting when interrupted. Within 3 weeks, her colleagues' behavior toward her completely changed. The same ideas she'd been sharing for months were finally being heard. This wasn't manipulation or aggression. It was simply aligning her focus with what was actually in her control. The implementation is straightforward but profound. First, before entering any situation where respect is important, explicitly identify what's within your control and what isn't. This mental preparation prevents you from slipping into approval-seeking behavior. Second, eliminate hedging language that signals you're seeking validation. Phrases like, "I'm not sure if this is right, but," or "this might be a stupid question," subtly communicate that you don't respect your own thoughts, so others shouldn't either. Third, when speaking, practice deliberate pacing. Most people speed up when they feel they're not being respected, which paradoxically reduces others' respect further. Try this immediately. In your next 3 conversations, practice speaking about 15% more slowly than usual, maintaining eye contact and pausing a full second before responding to others. Fourth, when faced with disrespect, resist the urge to demand respect, which never works, and instead demonstrate self-respect through your response. Rather than getting defensive or withdrawing, simply continue as if the disrespect hadn't happened, or address it calmly. I'd like to finish my thought. Seneca addressed this directly in a letter to his friend Lucilius. The man who fears death will never do anything worthy of a living man. But the man who knows that this was the condition laid down for him at the moment of his conception will live on those terms and at the same time will guarantee with a similar strength of mind that no events take him by surprise. In modern terms, he's saying that once you accept what's outside your control, you gain tremendous power over what is within it. I know what you might be thinking, but if I don't try to make people respect me, won't they just walk all over me? This is the most common misconception about the dichotomy of control. The reality is exactly the opposite. When you stop seeking approval, you naturally establish stronger boundaries because you're no longer compromising your values for validation. Let me share a personal example. I once worked with a team where one colleague constantly spoke over me. Initially, I tried everything to gain his respect, working harder, staying later, even mimicking his communication style. Nothing worked. Finally, I applied the dichotomy of control. In our next meeting, when he interrupted me, instead of getting flustered, I calmly said, "I'd like to finish my point first, then I'm interested in your perspective." The room went silent. Not because I'd been aggressive, my tone was perfectly pleasant, but because for the first time I was demonstrating self-respect. From that moment, the dynamic shifted permanently. He didn't just interrupt me less, he actually began asking for my opinion. Now I want you to try a simple experiment. The next time someone disrespects you, interrupts, dismisses your idea, or speaks to you condescendingly, observe your automatic reaction without acting on it. Just notice the immediate impulse to either please them or fight back. Then, choose a response based solely on your values, not on trying to change their behavior or perception. This mental shift is subtle but powerful. Instead of thinking, "How do I get them to respect me?" ask yourself, "How would I respond if I deeply respected myself?" This one question can transform any interaction. Marcus Aurelius practiced this daily. As emperor, he faced constant criticism and manipulation from those seeking favor. In his journal, he reminded himself, "When another blames you or hates you, or people voice similar criticisms, go to their souls, penetrate inside, and see what sort of people they are. You will realize that there is no need to be racked with anxiety that they should hold any particular opinion about you." This isn't about becoming indifferent to others. It's about placing the source of your worth inside yourself rather than in their hands. The most challenging aspect of this practice comes when you face significant disrespect. Imagine you've prepared extensively for a presentation, only to have your boss dismiss your ideas without consideration. The Stoic approach isn't to suppress your feelings or pretend it doesn't bother you. Instead, it's to acknowledge the disappointment while maintaining focus on what remains in your control. You might think, "I'm disappointed my ideas weren't considered." That's a natural feeling. What's within my control now? I can ask specific questions to understand concerns. I can refine my approach for next time. I can continue believing in the value of my contribution regardless of its immediate reception. This internal dialogue keeps you centered on your sovereignty rather than on changing others' behavior. Let's make this even more concrete with another example. Imagine you're in a relationship where your partner consistently dismisses your feelings. The conventional approach would be trying to make them understand, explaining again and again why their behavior hurts you, hoping to change their perception. The Stoic approach is fundamentally different. You would focus instead on clearly expressing your experience once, establishing appropriate boundaries based on your values, and then making decisions based on those values rather than on whether they change. This shift often creates a profound change in the relationship dynamic because you're no longer emotionally dependent on their validation. Epictetus, who began life as a slave, understood this principle better than anyone. He taught, "Make it your study then to confront every harsh impression with the words, 'You are but an impression, and not at all what you seem to be.'" In modern language, when you feel disrespected, recognize that the feeling comes not from their behavior alone, but from your interpretation of that behavior. This is empowering because while you can't control their behavior, you absolutely can control your interpretation and response. The most powerful demonstration of this principle comes when you respond to disrespect with genuine equanimity rather than either submission or aggression. This unexpected response often completely changes the dynamic because it signals that your self-respect is not contingent on their behavior. I want to address something important. Applying the dichotomy of control doesn't mean becoming a doormat. In fact, people who master this principle often establish stronger boundaries precisely because they're no longer afraid of disapproval. When your sense of worth doesn't depend on others' validation, you become much more comfortable saying no, expressing disagreement, or removing yourself from disrespectful situations. The key is that you do these things not to manipulate others into respecting you, but as a natural expression of self-respect. As we conclude this chapter, I want you to remember this core truth. The respect you desire cannot be demanded or manipulated from others. It can only be cultivated within yourself and then recognized by those around you. When you focus exclusively on what's within your control, your principles, responses, and boundaries, you create the conditions for genuine respect to flourish. Try this as you go through your day today. Before each interaction, take 5 seconds to remind yourself, "I cannot control their response, only my principles and actions." This simple practice will gradually rewire how you approach every situation where respect is at stake. When Seneca was banished by Emperor Nero, he faced the ultimate disrespect, going from imperial advisor to despised exile. What he did then was shocking to many. He used a technique the Stoics called premeditatio malorum, the practice of deliberately anticipating negative scenarios. This method transformed his ability to maintain composure when disrespected. And here's the fascinating part. Modern neuroscience has discovered that this exercise literally reconfigures your brain to respond to disrespect in ways that immediately command respect. When Seneca was banished by Emperor Nero, he faced the ultimate disrespect, going from imperial advisor to despised exile. What he did then was shocking to many. He used a technique the Stoics called premeditatio malorum, the practice of deliberately anticipating negative scenarios. This method transformed his ability to maintain composure when disrespected. And here's the fascinating part. Modern neuroscience has discovered that this exercise literally reconfigures your brain to respond to disrespect in ways that immediately command respect. Imagine this. You're about to walk into an important meeting where, based on past experience, you know someone will likely interrupt you, dismiss your ideas, or perhaps take credit for your work. How do you typically prepare? Most of us do one of two things. Either worry anxiously about what might happen, or try to push the thoughts away entirely. Neither approach actually prepares us for responding effectively. This is where the Stoic practice of premeditatio malorum, which I call resilience engineering, changes everything. Epictetus, who experienced extreme disrespect as a former slave, explained it this way. When you're about to undertake any action, remind yourself what kind of action it is. If you're going to bathe, picture what happens at a bathhouse, people splashing water, pushing, insulting one another. You will complete the act with more composure if you say at the outset, "I want to bathe and to maintain my will in accordance with nature." What does this mean for us today? Instead of hoping disrespect won't happen, we deliberately visualize it occurring and mentally rehearse our ideal response. This isn't negative thinking. It's strategic preparation that builds neural pathways for composed responses rather than reactive ones. Take a moment right now and think about a situation where you're frequently disrespected. Maybe it's a particular person who talks over you, a family member who dismisses your opinions, or a colleague who never acknowledges your contributions. Can you picture a specific instance clearly? Good. Now, instead of focusing on how it makes you feel, I want you to visualize yourself responding with calm confidence. Not aggressive, not passive, but centered and composed. The neurological basis for why this works is fascinating. When we experience disrespect unprepared, our amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, hijacks our higher reasoning. This amygdala hijack bypasses our prefrontal cortex, the rational thinking part of our brain, triggering either fight, flight, or freeze responses. None of these reactions command respect. By mentally rehearsing challenging scenarios in advance, we create alternative neural pathways. When the real situation occurs, our brain already has a roadmap for a composed response, allowing us to access our prefrontal cortex rather than being hijacked by our amygdala. It's like installing an automatic pilot system for maintaining dignity under pressure. I worked with someone, let's call him Thomas, who was constantly interrupted in board meetings. His typical response was to either go silent, freeze, or become visibly frustrated, fight, neither of which helped him gain respect. After practicing resilience engineering, he prepared a simple but powerful response. "I'd like to finish my thought, and then I'm eager to hear your perspective." He practiced this response repeatedly in his mind, visualizing the exact person who typically interrupted him, hearing their voice, and rehearsing his calm, measured response. The next time it actually happened, instead of his usual reaction, he delivered his prepared response with perfect composure. The interruptions didn't immediately stop, but the dynamic shifted dramatically. People began to notice his composure, and within a few weeks, he was being interrupted far less and listened to more attentively. To implement this technique effectively, follow these 4 steps. First, identify specific situations where you typically experience disrespect. Be as precise as possible. Name the person, the setting, the type of disrespect. Second, for each scenario, vividly imagine the disrespect occurring. Don't shy away from the details. Hear the person's tone, see their facial expression, feel the initial emotions that arise in your body. Third, practice your ideal response, not defensive or aggressive, but calmly assertive. For instance, if someone dismisses your idea, you might say, "I'd like to elaborate on that point because I believe it addresses a key issue we're facing." The specific words matter less than the tone and composure. Fourth, rehearse this mental scenario daily until your response becomes automatic. This repetition is crucial. It's literally rewiring your neural pathways. I know what you might be thinking. Isn't this just negative thinking? Won't focusing on potential disrespect make me more anxious? This is a common misconception. Premeditatio malorum isn't about dwelling on negative possibilities. It's about removing their power to disrupt your composure. Seneca addressed this directly. We suffer more in imagination than in reality. By facing potential disrespect in our minds and preparing for it, we reduce its impact when it actually occurs. The anxiety comes not from anticipating difficulties, but from being unprepared for them. Another key benefit of this practice is that it breaks the unconscious cycle of reactivity that signals to others that disrespect affects you deeply. When someone disrespects you and you react emotionally, whether with anger, defensiveness, or visible hurt, you unintentionally reinforce their behavior by showing it has power over you. When you respond with unexpected composure, you disrupt this pattern. The person disrespecting you suddenly finds their usual tactic ineffective, which often leads them to unconsciously adjust their behavior. It's not about manipulating others, it's about changing the dynamic by changing the one variable you control: your response. Try this experiment right now. Imagine someone criticizing your work unfairly in front of others. Feel that initial flush of emotion, perhaps anger or embarrassment. Now, instead of reacting to those emotions, visualize yourself taking a slow, deep breath, maintaining eye contact and saying calmly, "I appreciate the feedback. Could you elaborate on your specific concerns so I can address them properly?" Notice how different this feels from your habitual response. Marcus Aurelius practiced this technique regularly as emperor. In his meditations, he wrote, "Begin each day by telling yourself, 'Today I shall be meeting with interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, ill will, and selfishness.'" This wasn't pessimism. It was preparation that allowed him to maintain his principles regardless of how others behaved. Let's apply this to modern contexts with a few specific examples. Imagine you're about to give a presentation and you know there's someone in the audience who tends to ask aggressive, undermining questions. Rather than hoping they won't speak up, visualize them asking the most challenging question you can imagine. Then mentally rehearse maintaining eye contact, taking a breath, and responding thoughtfully rather than defensively. When it actually happens, you'll find yourself remarkably composed. Or perhaps you're dealing with a family member who consistently dismisses your life choices. Instead of dreading your next interaction, visualize them making their typical dismissive comment. Then practice responding with something like, "I understand we see this differently, and that's okay. I've given this careful thought, and I'm comfortable with my decision." Rehearse delivering this with a calm, warm tone rather than a defensive one. I want to emphasize something important. Resilience engineering isn't about suppressing your emotions or becoming robotic. It's about creating space between stimulus and response, what psychologist Viktor Frankl called the last of human freedoms. You still feel the initial emotion when disrespected, but you're no longer controlled by it. The Stoics understood that this space, this pause between what happens to us and how we respond, is where our dignity lives. By preparing for disrespect, we widen that space, giving ourselves more freedom to choose responses that align with our principles rather than our impulses. Now, let's address a common challenge. What about spontaneous disrespect that you couldn't specifically anticipate? This is where general scenario training comes in. Beyond preparing for specific situations, you can also rehearse your general approach to unexpected disrespect. For example, you might practice a universal response like, "That's an interesting perspective. I see it differently, and here's why." This creates a template that can be adapted to various situations where your ideas are dismissed. I've found that most people experience disrespect in patterns, even if the specific instances vary. By identifying these patterns and preparing for them, you'll develop general resilience that transfers across situations. The beauty of this technique is that it creates a virtuous cycle. Each time you respond to disrespect with composure, you strengthen your confidence in your ability to handle future challenges. This growing confidence naturally reflects in your presence, which in turn reduces the likelihood of being disrespected in the first place. Remember the story of Epictetus teaching a wealthy Roman who complained about being disrespected despite his status? Epictetus asked, "Are you certain you are not inviting this treatment by how you respond to it?" He understood that our reactions to disrespect often encourage more of the same behavior. Let me share another powerful application of this technique. Many of us experience what I call anticipated disrespect. the fear that we will be dismissed or ignored before it even happens. This anticipatory anxiety can be paralyzing, causing us to hold back our ideas or speak with undermining hesitation. Premeditatio malorum works wonderfully for this too. Instead of vaguely worrying about potential negative reactions, vividly imagine the worst plausible response to your contribution. Then, mentally rehearse proceeding anyway, with dignity and conviction in your value. This preparation often reveals that even the worst-case scenario is survivable, which liberates you to speak with more confidence. I know someone who was terrified of speaking up in group settings because she once had an idea publicly ridiculed. Through practicing resilience engineering, she deliberately visualized someone dismissing her idea in the harshest terms, then rehearsed responding with, "I understand you disagree." Here's why I believe this approach has merit. After practicing this scenario dozens of times in her mind, her fear of speaking up gradually diminished. The anticipated disrespect lost its power to silence her. As you implement this technique, you'll notice something remarkable. Situations that once triggered intense emotional reactions will begin to feel manageable. This isn't because you've become insensitive, but because you've developed what the Stoics called the inner citadel, a core of dignity that external circumstances cannot breach. Let's put this into practice right now with a brief exercise. Close your eyes for a moment and identify a specific situation in the coming week where you might face disrespect. Visualize it in vivid detail, where you'll be, who will be there, what might be said or done that would typically upset you. Now, imagine yourself responding with perfect composure, not passive or aggressive, but calmly assertive and centered in your self-respect. What exactly would you say? How would you hold your body? What would your tone convey? Rehearse this response 3 times in your mind, making it more detailed each time. If you've done this exercise sincerely, you've already begun rewiring your brain's response pathways. Continue this practice daily, especially before entering situations where respect might be challenged. The ultimate goal isn't to never feel the sting of disrespect. That's neither possible nor desirable. Rather, it's to develop the capacity to feel it without being defined or controlled by it. This is the essence of what Epictetus meant when he said, "Make it your study, then, to confront every harsh impression with the words, 'You are but an impression, and not at all what you seem to be.'" When you can experience disrespect as merely information about the other person rather than a judgment about your worth, you've mastered one of the most powerful Stoic techniques for commanding genuine respect. While most people avoid examining their own contribution to being disrespected, the Stoics practiced rigorous self-examination, not as self-criticism but as strategic improvement. Seneca recommended ending each day with a series of questions, including, "What weakness have I cured today? What fault have I resisted? In what respect am I better?" This practice allowed him to continuously refine how he presented himself to the world. The story of Epictetus responding to disrespect is particularly powerful because he wasn't speaking from a position of privilege. Born a slave, he understood what it meant to be systematically disregarded. Yet he developed a technique so effective that even those who initially saw him as inferior came to deeply respect him. This method, which I call selective response, transformed how people perceived him, not through manipulation, but through a profound shift in how he engaged with disrespect. At its core, selective response is based on a fundamental Stoic insight. It is not events that disturb people. It is their judgments concerning them. Epictetus wasn't just being philosophical when he said this. He was revealing a practical truth that can transform how people respond to you. Think about the last time someone interrupted you in a conversation. What happened inside you? If you're like most people, you felt a surge of emotion, perhaps irritation, embarrassment, or even anger. You probably assumed this person was deliberately disrespecting you. But what if that interpretation itself is what creates the problematic response? Let's try something right now. Close your eyes for a moment and recall a recent situation where you felt disrespected. Notice what happens in your body as you remember it. Perhaps tension in your shoulders, a change in your breathing, a slight flush in your face. This physical reaction isn't caused directly by what the person did, but by your interpretation of their action as disrespect. This distinction is crucial because it gives you a choice point that most people miss entirely. When faced with potential disrespect, you have three options: react emotionally, suppress your response, or engage selectively. Most of us toggle only between the first two, neither of which commands respect. Epictetus taught his students to first categorize apparent disrespect before responding. Is it accidental, habitual, or intentional? This simple classification changes everything about how you respond. Let me show you how this works in practice. Imagine you're in a meeting and a colleague interrupts you mid-sentence. Before responding, quickly categorize: is this accidental disrespect? They're excited about the topic and didn't notice they cut you off. Habitual disrespect. They interrupt everyone because of poor conversation skills. Or intentional disrespect. They're deliberately trying to undermine you. Each category calls for a different response. For accidental disrespect, a gentle redirection works best. I'd like to finish my thought and then I'm eager to hear yours. For habitual disrespect, a pattern-breaking response might be needed. I've noticed you often jump in before I've finished. I'd appreciate being able to complete my points. For intentional disrespect, strategic silence followed by calm boundary setting is most effective. When you interrupt me, we lose the thread of what I was explaining, which I believe is valuable to this discussion. The power of this technique lies in breaking the automatic cycle of reactivity that typically follows perceived disrespect. When you respond emotionally to disrespect, you paradoxically give the other person power over your internal state, which reinforces the dynamic of disrespect. Seneca demonstrated this principle masterfully when publicly insulted by Emperor Nero. Instead of either cowering, which would invite more abuse, or responding defensively, which would dignify the attack, he responded with calm curiosity. I wonder what leads you to that conclusion. This unexpected response completely shifted the dynamic, as it neither accepted the disrespect nor escalated it. Your body language during these moments communicates volumes about your self-respect. When faced with disrespect, most people unconsciously display submission signals, avoiding eye contact, hunching shoulders, speaking more quickly or softly. Practice doing the opposite. Maintain comfortable eye contact, keep your shoulders relaxed but square, breathe deeply, and speak at a measured pace. These physical signals of self-respect are often more powerful than your actual words. Let me share a story that illustrates how transformative this approach can be. I once worked with someone who was constantly interrupted in team meetings by a particularly dominant colleague. His initial strategy was to speak louder and faster when interrupted, which only made him appear desperate for attention. After learning selective response, he completely changed his approach. The next time his colleague interrupted him, instead of competing for airtime, he went silent, maintained relaxed eye contact with the group, and when the interrupter finished, calmly said, "Before we move on, I'd like to finish the point I was making, as I think it addresses a key aspect of what we're discussing." The room fell momentarily silent, not because he'd been aggressive, but because his response demonstrated such clear self-respect. Within 3 weeks of consistently using this approach, the interruptions had decreased by more than 70%. The most powerful aspect of selective response is that it works regardless of the other person's intentions or awareness. Even if they're deliberately trying to diminish you, your selective engagement deprives them of the reaction they're seeking, which naturally shifts the dynamic. Try this exercise now to develop your selective response skills. Think of 3 common situations where you experience disrespect. For each one, write down 1. How you typically respond. 2. What category of disrespect it likely represents: accidental, habitual, or intentional. 3 specific selective response you could use instead. For example, if someone frequently speaks over you in conversations, your typical response might be to stop talking and feel resentful. If you categorize this as habitual disrespect, your selective response might be, I notice I haven't finished my thought yet. I'd like to complete it, and then I'm very interested in your perspective. The key is that this response is neither passive nor aggressive. It's calmly assertive and based on self-respect rather than trying to control the other person. In relationships, this principle is particularly powerful. Imagine your partner repeatedly dismisses your feelings about something important to you. Instead of either withdrawing hurt feelings or escalating into an argument, a selective response might be, when you respond that way, I feel as though my experience isn't being heard. I value understanding each other, so I'd like to try explaining this differently. This approach works because it focuses on the pattern rather than the person, which makes defensive reactions less likely. The most challenging application of selective response comes when facing intentional disrespect, situations where someone is deliberately trying to diminish or provoke you. This is where strategic silence becomes your most powerful tool. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this approach. The best revenge is not to be like your enemy. When someone intentionally disrespects you, they're typically seeking to provoke an emotional reaction. By remaining composed, you demonstrate a level of self-mastery that naturally commands respect from others observing the interaction. I've found that a curious question is often the most powerful response to intentional disrespect. If someone makes a dismissive comment about your idea, instead of defending yourself, try asking with genuine curiosity, I'm interested in understanding your perspective better. What specific aspect of the idea don't you find convincing? This response does 3 things simultaneously. It shows you're not emotionally reactive, it demonstrates intellectual confidence, and it holds the other person accountable for substantiating their dismissal. Implementing selective response effectively requires practice. Start by simulating challenging scenarios with a trusted friend. Have them deliberately interrupt you, dismiss your ideas, or speak condescendingly, and practice responding with calm assertion rather than either passivity or aggression. This simulation training builds the neural pathways that allow you to access composed responses even when emotionally triggered. Remember that your goal isn't to never feel the sting of disrespect. That's neither possible nor desirable. The aim is to develop the capacity to feel it without being controlled by it, allowing you to choose responses that reflect your values rather than your triggers. One of the most profound aspects of this technique is how it transforms your internal experience of disrespect. When you consistently respond selectively rather than reactively, you gradually stop interpreting challenging interactions as personal attacks. This shift doesn't just change how others perceive you, it liberates you from the emotional toll of feeling constantly judged or dismissed. In meetings, selective response is particularly valuable for addressing one of the most common forms of disrespect: idea appropriation. When someone presents your idea as their own, instead of the typical reactions, silent resentment or direct accusation, try this. I'm glad to hear you supporting the approach I suggested earlier. I'd like to elaborate on how I see it being implemented. This response reclaims ownership without creating conflict. In relationships, this technique helps establish boundaries that generate respect rather than resistance. Instead of making demands or complaints when boundaries are crossed, frame your response in terms of patterns and impacts. I've noticed that when X happens, the effect is Y. What I need for our relationship to thrive is Z. This formula focuses on solutions rather than blame. The test of true mastery with selective response comes when you can implement it in emotionally charged situations. Practice by intentionally exposing yourself to progressively more challenging interactions, starting with low-stakes scenarios and working up to contexts where respect is most important to you. Think about how you might apply this in your life starting today. What's one situation where you typically feel disrespected? How could you respond differently using what you've learned? Take a moment right now to visualize implementing a selective response in that specific situation. The transformation isn't immediate. It's a practice that deepens over time. Each selective response builds upon the previous one, gradually shifting how others perceive and treat you. The beauty of this approach is that it doesn't require others to change first. It begins with your relationship to disrespect itself. As you develop this skill, you'll notice something remarkable. Situations that once felt like attacks on your worth now register simply as information about the other person. This shift from taking disrespect personally to seeing it as data represents the essence of what Epictetus meant when he said, "Remember that it is we who torment ourselves, that it is we who put difficulties in our own way." When you control your response, you control the dynamic. This isn't manipulation. It's reclaiming your power to define interactions based on your values rather than others' behavior. And there's something almost magical about what happens when you consistently respond to disrespect with calm self-assurance. People who previously disrespected you often begin to seek your approval instead. There exists a quality that both Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus cultivated deliberately, despite their radically different social positions. It's what the Stoics called constant virtue, the practice of aligning your actions with clearly defined values, regardless of the situation. Modern leadership studies have revealed that this specific quality is the strongest predictor of who naturally commands respect. In the next chapter, I'll show you how to develop this quality in a way that instantly transforms how others respond to you. Imagine having such internal clarity that your presence naturally commands attention without saying a word. That's the power of what the Stoics called constant virtue, a quality that both Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful emperor of Rome, and Epictetus, a former slave, cultivated despite their dramatically different social positions. This principle transformed how people responded to them, and it can do the same for you. Take a moment right now and think about someone you deeply respect. Not someone you fear or someone with formal authority, but someone whose presence naturally draws your attention and regard. What qualities make you respect them? When I ask this question in workshops, the answers are remarkably consistent. Integrity, consistency, clear principles, and a sense that they're guided by something deeper than social approval. These aren't coincidences. They're the visible manifestations of what the Stoics called virtue constancy. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his private journals, "Never esteem anything as of advantage to you that will make you break your word or lose your self-respect." He understood something profound, that respect from others flows naturally when you maintain unwavering alignment with your core values, regardless of external pressures or short-term benefits. This might sound abstract, so let's make it practical. Think about the last time you compromised one of your values to gain approval or avoid conflict. Perhaps you agreed with something you didn't actually believe or stayed silent when you should have spoken up. How did that make you feel afterward? More importantly, did it actually gain you the respect you were seeking? The Stoics discovered that these compromises, while seemingly small, create a subtle but perceptible inconsistency that others can sense, even if they can't articulate it. It's like a barely audible note out of tune in a symphony. Something feels off, Let's try a transformative exercise right now. Take 30 seconds to identify your 3 non-negotiable values, principles so core to who you are that you wouldn't compromise them even for approval or advancement. Don't choose abstract concepts like honesty or kindness that sound good but remain vague. Instead, frame them as specific commitments. I speak truth even when it's uncomfortable, or I give others credit for their contributions, even when I could claim them as my own. Have you identified them? Good. These 3 values form what I call your virtue compass, the internal guidance system that, when followed consistently, naturally generates respect from others. Here's where many people get confused. They believe respect comes from impressing others or projecting confidence. But psychological research reveals something fascinating. What we perceive as presence or charisma in others is often simply the outward manifestation of internal clarity. A landmark study on leadership perception found that leaders who demonstrated consistent values-based decision-making were rated 68% higher on measures of personal impact than those who were equally competent but less principled. Let me share a story that illustrates this powerfully. Imagine a team leader who was trying to be who he thought a manager should be: authoritative, decisive, always certain. Despite his efforts, his team's respect was lukewarm at best. When he defined his actual core principles, truthfulness, fairness, and excellence, and started explicitly referencing them in difficult decisions, something remarkable happened. His team's engagement and respect visibly increased, even when they disagreed with specific choices. What changed? He stopped trying to be respected and instead focused on being respectable according to his own clearly defined values. Seneca demonstrated this principle when he refused to participate in Nero's increasingly corrupt governance, despite knowing it would cost him his position and potentially his life. He wrote, "I prefer to offend you by the truth than to please you with flattery." This unwavering commitment to principle, even facing deadly consequences, is why his writings on integrity still command respect 2,000 years later. The power of this approach is its rarity. In a world where many people shift positions based on what's expedient or popular, someone guided by clear principles stands out immediately. It creates what psychologists now call presence authenticity, the quality of being perceived as genuinely aligned with one's stated beliefs. To implement value-based presence in your daily life, follow these 4 steps. First, identify your 3 core values that you won't compromise for approval. Take time with this. These aren't aspirational virtues, but accurate reflections of your deepest principles. Write them down and keep them somewhere visible. Second, practice articulating these values clearly and concisely. Most people can't explain what they stand for in under 30 seconds, which makes it impossible for others to understand their decision-making framework. Prepare a simple statement for each value. I believe in value because reason, which means I, specific behavior. Third, when faced with difficult decisions, reference these values explicitly. Instead of saying, I don't think we should do that, try, given my commitment to transparency, I have concerns about withholding this information from the team. This signals that your position comes from principle rather than preference. Fourth, be willing to maintain these principles even when they're temporarily unpopular. This doesn't mean being rigid or uncompromising on methods, but it does mean being clear about which ends you won't compromise to achieve. Epictetus taught his students, first say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. This simple instruction contains profound wisdom about respect. By defining your values before entering challenging situations, you create an internal sovereignty that others instinctively recognize. I know what you might be thinking, but what if my values conflict with what's expected in my workplace or relationship? Won't this create problems rather than respect? This is a natural concern, but the Stoics would argue the opposite is true. When you compromise your core values for external approval, you create an internal dissonance that manifests as inconsistency, which undermines respect far more than principled disagreement. Try this experiment for the next week. Before each significant interaction or decision, take 10 seconds to remind yourself of your 3 core values. Then engage from that centered place, rather than from concern about others' approval. Notice how this small shift changes both how you feel and how others respond to you. The effect is particularly powerful in challenging situations. Imagine receiving harsh criticism on a project you've worked hard on. Without a value compass, you might react defensively or become people-pleasing. With clear values, you might respond, "I appreciate the feedback. My commitment is to excellence, so I'd like to understand specifically what aspects fell short so I can improve them." This response demonstrates self-respect without arrogance and openness without insecurity, a combination that naturally commands respect. Marcus Aurelius faced this challenge daily as emperor. Court life was filled with flattery, manipulation, and shifting alliances. In his journal, he constantly reminded himself of his core values: justice, truth, temperance, and courage. By referencing these principles when making difficult decisions, he earned respect even from those who disagreed with his specific choices. The key insight here is that respect often hinges not on what you decide, but how you decide it. When others can predict your behavior based on consistent principles rather than social pressure or self-interest, they develop a deeper trust that transcends agreement on specific issues. I've noticed a common mistake people make when trying to implement this approach. They choose values that sound impressive rather than values they truly hold. Authenticity is crucial here. Inconsistency between stated values and actual behavior erodes respect faster than almost anything else. Take a moment now to review your 3 values. Ask yourself honestly, are these truly my values, or are they values I think I should have? The most powerful virtue compass comes from accurate self-knowledge, not aspirational ideals. This doesn't mean you can't grow toward aspirational values, but respect comes from consistency between what you say and what you do. So start with honest assessment of your current principles. The practical implementation of value-based presence requires what the Stoics called mindfulness, a continuous awareness of your guiding principles as you navigate daily decisions. This isn't about rigidity or moral superiority. It's about creating internal alignment that others can sense and respect. Let me offer a simple practice to develop this mindfulness. At the end of each day, ask yourself these 3 questions. 1. When did I act in alignment with my core values today? 2. When did I compromise them for approval or convenience? 3. What specific opportunity will I have tomorrow to demonstrate these values? This brief reflection strengthens your virtue compass and gradually eliminates the inconsistencies that undermine respect. The most powerful demonstration of value-based presence comes when you maintain your principles despite social pressure to conform. Imagine you're in a meeting where everyone is agreeing to a course of action that compromises one of your core values, perhaps truth or fairness. Rather than silently going along or becoming confrontational, you might say, "I have a perspective I'd like to share that might be different from what we've discussed so far. One of my guiding principles is value, and I'm concerned that this approach might conflict with that because reason." This kind of statement does 3 things simultaneously. It shows you're guided by principle rather than social pressure. It offers your perspective without attacking others, and it demonstrates the courage to stand alone when necessary, all qualities that naturally command respect. Remember that respect flows most naturally to those who don't appear to need it. When your sense of worth comes from alignment with your own values rather than others' validation, you paradoxically become more respected precisely because you're not seeking respect. As we conclude this chapter, I want to emphasize a crucial point. Developing value-based presence isn't about becoming rigid or judgmental. The Stoics emphasized virtues like justice and temperance precisely because they balanced principle with compassion. Your virtue compass should guide you toward both integrity and understanding of others. Take one more moment right now to commit to a specific situation in the coming days where you'll practice maintaining alignment with your core values, even if it means temporary discomfort or disapproval. This single commitment, consistently applied, can transform how others perceive and respond to you. When your presence emanates from clear internal principles rather than a desire for approval, you create what Marcus Aurelius called a fortress within, an unshakable self-respect that naturally commands respect from others. Not because you're demanding it, but because you're demonstrating what it looks like to live from a place of genuine conviction. There's a daily practice that all three great Stoics shared. Seneca did it before sleeping, Marcus Aurelius at dawn, and Epictetus taught it to all his students. It's what I call strategic self-examination, a systematic process for evaluating your interactions and continuously refining how you present yourself to the world. This practice alone can transform how you're perceived by others in just 2 weeks. Let me show you exactly how to implement it. There exists a daily practice that all three great Stoics shared. Seneca performed it before sleeping, Marcus Aurelius at dawn, and Epictetus taught it to all his students. It's what I call strategic self-examination, a systematic process for evaluating your interactions and continuously refining how you present yourself to the world. This practice alone can transform how you're perceived by others in just 2 weeks. Let me show you exactly how to implement it. Think about the last time you left an important interaction feeling frustrated or confused about why it didn't go well. Maybe you presented an idea that fell flat, or perhaps you felt invisible in a conversation despite having valuable insights to share. Most of us chalk these moments up to bad luck or blame others. They just don't get it. Or that person always dominates the conversation. But what if the key factors were actually within your control? The Stoics discovered something profound that modern psychology has only recently confirmed. Up to 93% of how we're perceived by others comes from subtle behaviors we're not even aware we're exhibiting. Seneca understood this when he wrote to his friend Lucilius. We should examine our own lives first, then we are allowed to judge others. But this wasn't just philosophical advice, it was a practical system for continuous improvement. Let me walk you through the exact protocol these ancient philosophers used. Seneca described ending each day with specific questions. What weakness have I cured today? What fault have I resisted? In what respect am I better? This wasn't self-criticism, but strategic improvement, identifying specific patterns that undermined how others perceived him. Try this right now. Close your eyes for 10 seconds and recall your most recent important interaction. Now, instead of focusing on what the other person did, ask yourself, what specific behaviors might I have exhibited that could have undermined how I was perceived? Perhaps you spoke too quickly, interrupted others, or qualified your statements with phrases like, I might be wrong, but... These small behaviors send powerful signals about how much you respect yourself. The science of self-awareness explains why this practice is so transformative. When we operate on autopilot, we repeatedly engage in unconscious behaviors that undermine respect, fidgeting, avoiding eye contact, speaking in a higher pitch when challenged, all sending subtle signals that we don't fully believe in ourselves. By bringing these patterns into consciousness, we can systematically replace them with behaviors that naturally command respect. Let me guide you through your first strategic self-examination session. Find 5 minutes tonight before bed and ask yourself these 5 questions. 1. In which moments today did I feel most respected by others? 2. In which moments did I feel least respected? 3. What specific behaviors did I exhibit in each situation? 4. What unconscious signals might I have been sending about my self-respect? What one behavior could I modify tomorrow to shift the dynamic? Write down your answers. The act of documentation significantly increases the effectiveness of this practice. The key is focusing on observable behaviors rather than vague impressions. Instead of, "I wasn't assertive enough," identify the specific behavior. I prefaced my main point with 3 qualifying statements that undermined its impact. Marcus Aurelius practiced this technique religiously. In his meditations, he wrote, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly." This wasn't pessimism, it was strategic preparation. By examining how he had responded to difficult people previously, he could refine his approach for future interactions. I remember working with someone, let's call them Alex, who consistently felt overlooked in team meetings despite having valuable insights. Through strategic self-examination, Alex discovered a pattern. Whenever sharing an idea, they would physically lean back, lower their voice, and end statements with an upward inflection that made assertions sound like questions. None of these behaviors were conscious, but together they signaled a lack of conviction that led others to give less weight to their contributions. By focusing on changing just one behavior each week, starting with maintaining a forward-leaning posture when speaking, Alex created a visible shift in how colleagues responded. Within 3 weeks, they were being interrupted less, and their ideas were being referenced more often by teammates. Nothing had changed about their expertise or the content of their contributions, only the behavioral signals they were sending about their relationship with their own ideas. The most powerful aspect of this practice is its focus on identifying emotional triggers. We all have specific situations that activate our insecurities, causing us to compromise our self-respect without realizing it. Perhaps it's when someone with more formal authority challenges you, or when a specific topic makes you feel vulnerable. By mapping these triggers through daily reflection, you can prepare alternative responses before encountering them again. One crucial element that makes this practice so effective is approaching it with curiosity rather than judgment. The Stoics emphasized that self-examination should be done as an observer might study an interesting phenomenon, not as a harsh critic looking for flaws. As Epictetus taught, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid with regard to external things." This means being willing to objectively observe your own behavior without defensiveness. Think about how you might apply this in your own life. Perhaps you've noticed people seem to tune out when you're explaining something important. Instead of assuming they're disinterested, the strategic self-examination might reveal that you tend to over-explain with unnecessary details before getting to your main point. This insight isn't a criticism. It's valuable data that allows you to adjust your approach. Marcus Aurelius demonstrated how to use mistakes as growth opportunities rather than sources of shame. He wrote, "Does another's mistake affect you? Then let it be." He applied this same compassionate perspective to his own errors, viewing them as natural parts of being human and opportunities for refinement rather than evidence of inadequacy. In our modern context, this practice can be adapted to fit busy schedules while maintaining its effectiveness. Even 5 minutes of focused reflection at the end of your day can yield significant insights. I recommend keeping a dedicated journal or note on your phone specifically for this practice, creating a record you can review to identify patterns over time. The rule of single improvement makes this practice particularly powerful. Rather than trying to change everything at once, focus on modifying just one behavior each week. This concentrated attention creates visible change much faster than attempting a complete personality overhaul. Maybe this week you focus solely on eliminating filler words like and like from your speech, and next week you work on maintaining steady eye contact when expressing important points. I worked with someone who was naturally quiet and struggled to be heard in group settings. Through strategic self-examination, they realized they were unconsciously signaling that their contributions weren't important through specific behaviors, waiting for perfect silence before speaking, which rarely came, speaking too softly, and physically taking up less space than others at the table. By focusing on changing just one of these behaviors each week, they transformed their presence in meetings without changing their fundamental personality or becoming someone they weren't. Creating a feedback cycle can accelerate your progress dramatically. While self-observation is powerful, we all have blind spots. Consider asking one person you trust implicitly for specific feedback. I'm working on how I communicate in meetings. What's one behavior you've noticed that might undermine how my ideas are received? The key is requesting observation about specific behaviors rather than general impressions. How will you know if this practice is working? Look for these objective indicators of change in how others perceive you. Fewer interruptions when you're speaking, more follow-up questions about your ideas, others referencing your contributions later in the conversation, being sought out for your perspective on important matters, increased comfort in maintaining your position when challenged. These signals indicate that your internal work is creating external change. The daily commitment required is minimal, but the impact is profound. 5 minutes of focused reflection each day for 2 weeks will reveal patterns you've never noticed before. As Seneca wrote, "Nothing is more dishonorable than an old man who has no other evidence of having lived a long time except his age." Strategic self-examination ensures that each day adds wisdom rather than merely adding time. Let me address a common concern. Won't focusing on how I'm perceived make me self-conscious and unnatural? This is a thoughtful question, but the Stoics would point out that temporary self-consciousness is the necessary bridge to natural improvement. Think about learning any new skill, from driving to public speaking. There's always an initial phase where conscious attention makes the process feel mechanical. With practice, the new behaviors become automatic, and what once required focus becomes your natural way of being. Try this exercise tomorrow. Select one specific behavior you've identified through self-examination. Perhaps maintaining a steady voice tone when challenged, or eliminating a nervous habit like touching your face while speaking. Spend the entire day focused just on that one element. Notice how it might feel awkward at first, but becomes more natural with each interaction. Remember that this practice isn't about becoming someone else. It's about removing the unconscious behaviors that prevent others from seeing who you truly are and the value you bring. As Epictetus said, "It is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows." Strategic self-examination creates the humility and awareness necessary for genuine growth. The 5 minutes you invest daily in this practice will compound over time, creating what the Stoics might call a virtuous cycle of improvement. Each small adjustment in how you present yourself creates slightly better responses from others, which builds confidence, which further improves how you carry yourself, leading to even more positive responses. As we conclude this chapter, I encourage you to commit right now to trying strategic self-examination for the next 14 days. Start tonight with the 5 questions I shared earlier. Focus on identifying one behavior to modify tomorrow, and watch how this simple practice begins to transform how others respond to you. The respect you've been seeking may be just a few adjusted behaviors away. One of the most powerful discoveries of the Stoics was what they called phantasiae, the understanding that we don't experience reality directly, but through our interpretations of it. They developed a specific technique for questioning and reframing these interpretations that has an immediate effect on respect dynamics. It's called cognitive questioning. And when you master this tool, situations that previously triggered insecurity will transform into opportunities to demonstrate impressive presence. The Stoics discovered something revolutionary about the human mind that modern psychology has only recently begun to fully appreciate. They observed that we don't actually experience reality directly. We experience our interpretations of reality. They called these interpretations phantasiae, which essentially means appearances or impressions. This understanding isn't just philosophical. It's intensely practical when it comes to commanding respect. Think about the last time someone interrupted you during a conversation. What went through your mind in that moment? Perhaps you thought, they don't value what I have to say, or they're deliberately disrespecting me. That interpretation, not the interruption itself, is what triggered your emotional response, which then shaped how you reacted. Epictetus put it brilliantly when he said, "It is not events that disturb people, it is their judgments concerning them." This insight is the foundation of what I call cognitive questioning, a technique for examining and reframing the automatic interpretations that undermine your presence and respect. Let me guide you through a quick exercise to demonstrate how powerful this is. Think of a recent situation where you felt disrespected. Perhaps a colleague dismissed your idea in a meeting, or someone spoke over you in a conversation. Got it? Now identify the automatic thought that immediately went through your mind. Was it something like, they think I'm incompetent, or no one values my input? This automatic interpretation, often formed in milliseconds, is what determined your emotional response and subsequent behavior. Now let's examine this interpretation using cognitive questioning. The Stoics developed a systematic approach to questioning our automatic thoughts that's remarkably similar to modern cognitive behavioral therapy. It begins with recognizing the four most common distortions that undermine respect. The first is personalization, assuming that someone's behavior is specifically targeted at you when it might have nothing to do with you. For example, if your boss seems dismissive in a meeting, your automatic interpretation might be, "She doesn't respect me." But there could be countless other explanations. Perhaps she just received stressful news, or she's preoccupied with a deadline. The second distortion is mind reading, assuming you know exactly what others are thinking about you. We're actually terrible at this, yet we make these assumptions constantly. When someone looks at their phone while you're speaking, do you automatically assume they're bored by what you're saying? That's mind reading. The third is catastrophizing, interpreting a small incident as having massive implications. If someone challenges your idea, does it become, "Everyone thinks I'm incompetent" in your mind? That's catastrophizing. The fourth is overgeneralization, taking a single incident and turning it into a universal pattern. "He interrupted me again. I never get any respect from anyone," is a classic example. Marcus Aurelius practiced questioning these distortions constantly. In his meditations he wrote, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly." This wasn't pessimism. It was a reminder that others' behaviors reflect their state, not his worth. By questioning his automatic interpretations of others' actions, he maintained his dignity regardless of how he was treated. Here's where this becomes transformative for earning respect. When you question and reframe your interpretations, you change your emotional response, which changes your behavior, which dramatically alters how others perceive you. Let me show you the exact protocol for cognitive questioning that can transform any disrespect trigger. When you notice yourself feeling disrespected, ask these three powerful questions. First, what am I interpreting this to mean about me or my worth? This question brings your automatic interpretation into conscious awareness where you can examine it. Second, what are at least 3 other possible interpretations of this situation? This question breaks the spell of your initial interpretation by generating alternatives. Third, even if my initial interpretation were true, what would be a more empowering way to think about this? This question puts you back in control of your response, regardless of others' behavior. Let me show you how this works in practice. Imagine you present an idea in a meeting, and your colleague immediately points out a flaw in your reasoning. Your automatic interpretation might be, "They're trying to make me look bad," mind reading, or "Everyone thinks I'm incompetent now," catastrophizing. Using cognitive questioning, you'd first recognize this interpretation. I'm interpreting this as an attack on my competence. Then you'd generate alternative interpretations. They might be trying to strengthen the idea by addressing weaknesses. They might be demonstrating their own expertise rather than attacking mine. They might have a genuine concern about that aspect of the plan. Finally, you'd find a more empowering frame. Even if they were trying to undermine me, I can demonstrate true confidence by considering the feedback on its merits rather than reacting defensively. This internal reframing completely changes how you respond externally. Instead of becoming defensive or withdrawing, both reactions that diminish respect, you might say, "That's an important consideration. Let me address how I think we could handle that challenge." This response demonstrates remarkable self-possession that naturally commands respect. The neurological impact of this technique is fascinating. Research shows that questioning your interpretations literally changes your brain's response pattern. When you accept your initial interpretation as fact, your amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, activates, triggering fight-flight-freeze responses. But when you question your interpretation, you activate your prefrontal cortex instead, enabling thoughtful responses that demonstrate self-command. I know what you might be thinking, but doing this in the moment seems impossible when emotions are running high. This is where practice becomes crucial. Start by applying cognitive questioning to past situations until the process becomes familiar. Then apply it to low-stakes current situations, gradually working up to more triggering scenarios. Marcus Aurelius used this technique extensively in dealing with the Roman Senate, where political opponents constantly challenged him. In his journal, he wrote about questioning his interpretations of their criticisms. When someone seems to have wronged you, immediately ask yourself, what judgment about good or evil formed the basis for this person's action? He was training himself to see their behavior as information about them rather than a judgment about him. Let's try applying this to everyday scenarios. Imagine you send an important email and receive no response for 3 days. Your automatic interpretation might be, "They're ignoring me," or "They don't consider me important enough to respond to." This interpretation would likely lead to feelings of resentment or insecurity, which might cause you to either send a defensive follow-up or avoid the person altogether, neither of which commands respect. Using cognitive questioning, you'd recognize this interpretation, then generate alternatives. They might be overwhelmed with other priorities. The email might have gotten buried in their inbox. They might be taking time to consider a thoughtful response. The empowering reframe might be, regardless of why they haven't responded, I can demonstrate professionalism by sending a calm, helpful follow-up rather than assuming the worst. This reframed interpretation leads to a completely different response, one that demonstrates self-respect rather than insecurity. I worked with someone who transformed their professional reputation using this exact technique. They discovered that whenever their ideas were questioned, they interpreted it as a personal attack and became defensively verbose, trying to prove their expertise. By applying cognitive questioning, They reframed challenges as opportunities to engage in meaningful dialogue rather than threats to their credibility. This shift in interpretation changed their entire communication style, and within months, they were being sought out for their perspective rather than avoided. The beauty of this technique is that it works in any context where respect is at stake. In personal relationships, family dynamics, or professional settings, our interpretations of others' behaviors fundamentally shape how we respond, which in turn determines how much respect we command. To develop this skill, try creating a daily practice for the next week. Each evening, identify one situation where you felt your respect was challenged. Write down your automatic interpretation, then apply the 3 questions to reframe it. Over time, you'll begin catching and questioning your interpretations in real time. Seneca advised his students to regularly question their interpretations of criticism. Consider whether your critic may be right. If so, accept the correction gladly. If not, assume they speak from misunderstanding rather than malice. This perspective transforms criticism from a threat to your dignity into merely information that you can evaluate objectively. The most powerful application of cognitive questioning comes when facing intentional disrespect. Even when someone is deliberately trying to diminish you, your interpretation of their behavior determines your response. By reframing their disrespect as information about their limitations rather than your worth, you maintain a composed presence that paradoxically commands more respect from everyone observing the interaction. Remember that respect flows to those who maintain their dignity, regardless of how they're treated. When you free yourself from reactive interpretations, you demonstrate a level of self-command that naturally draws others' regard. As you practice this technique, you'll notice something remarkable happening. Situations that previously triggered intense emotional reactions will begin to lose their power over you. This isn't because you've become indifferent, but because you've developed the ability to see more clearly what's actually happening beneath the surface of interactions. Epictetus captured this transformation when he said, "Make it your study then to confront every harsh impression with the words, 'You are but an impression, and not at all what you seem to be.'" With practice, this ability to question your interpretations becomes not just a technique but a way of being, one that naturally commands respect without demanding it. Let's end with a practical commitment. In the next 24 hours, when you notice yourself feeling disrespected, pause for just 2 seconds and ask yourself, what am I interpreting this to mean, and what's another way to see this? This tiny intervention can completely change the dynamic of the interaction, transforming a moment of potential reactivity into a demonstration of remarkable presence. One of the aspects of presence that the Stoics understood deeply was the power of precise and deliberate language. Seneca, known as Rome's greatest orator, developed a specific technique for communication that naturally generated respect. It's what I call verbal precision, a method of speaking that eliminates language that signals insecurity and replaces it with patterns that automatically elevate your perceived authority. In the next few minutes, I'll show you how to completely transform the impact of your words. There's a hidden language of respect that few people recognize but everyone responds to. It's what Seneca, arguably Rome's greatest orator, mastered centuries ago. The precise use of words that naturally command attention and regard. While most focus on what they say, the Stoics understood that how you say it often determines whether others truly hear you. Think about the last time you shared an important idea and felt people weren't really listening. Did you find yourself adding qualifiers like, "This might sound stupid, but," or "I'm not sure if this makes sense"? These verbal patterns seem innocent, but they're actually subtle signals that undermine your authority before you've even made your point. Seneca wrote extensively about the power of precise language. In his letters to Lucilius, he advised, Let your speech be measured, not governed by the fashion of the day. He understood that our words reveal our relationship with ourselves, and others instinctively pick up on these signals when deciding how seriously to take us. Let's try a quick experiment. Read these two versions of the same statement and notice how differently they land. Version 1. I kind of think we might want to consider possibly adjusting our approach a little bit, if that makes sense to everyone. Version 2. Based on the current results, I believe we should adjust our approach. The first version contains 6 qualifying phrases that signal uncertainty. The second expresses the identical recommendation, but with clear conviction. Which speaker would you naturally respect more? The patterns that undermine your verbal authority fall into several categories. First are qualifiers. Phrases like sort of, kind of, or a little bit that dilute your message. Next are permission phrases, if that makes sense or if you know what I mean, that suggest you need validation. Then there are apologetic prefaces. I'm not an expert, but, or this might be a stupid question, that diminish your credibility before you've even spoken. Most of us use these patterns unconsciously, especially in situations where we feel our status or expertise might be questioned. They're verbal habits that developed as social lubricants, but they exact a heavy price in terms of the respect your words command. I worked with someone who couldn't understand why her thoroughly researched recommendations were consistently overlooked. When we recorded her presentations, the pattern became clear. She used an average of 9 undermining phrases per minute. After eliminating these patterns, the same content delivered with verbal precision was not only heard, but implemented. Try this right now. Think of an opinion you hold strongly. First, express it in your mind with all the typical qualifiers you might use. Now, reformulate it with absolute precision and directness. Notice how differently you feel stating the clean version. That's exactly how differently others will perceive you. The art of the direct declaration is perhaps the most powerful verbal tool for commanding respect. This doesn't mean being blunt or aggressive. It means constructing statements that reflect conviction. Instead of, I was thinking maybe we could try, we say, I recommend we implement. The content is identical, but the impact is worlds apart. Epictetus, who began life as a slave, yet commanded the respect of emperors, taught his students to speak with the authority that comes from certainty. He understood that verbal precision reflects mental clarity, and mental clarity naturally generates respect. Let me share the 5 most powerful verbal precision techniques that you can implement immediately. First, eliminate upward inflections that make statements sound like questions. Many of us unconsciously raise our pitch at the end of sentences, transforming definitive statements into what sounds like requests for approval. Practice keeping your intonation flat or slightly downward when making statements. Record yourself if possible. Most people are shocked to discover this pattern in their speech. Second, replace minimizers with specific language. Instead of, I just wanted to check if, say, I'm following up on. Instead of, I have a small concern about. Say, I have a concern about. These subtle shifts eliminate the self-diminishment built into common phrases. Third, practice strategic silence. Most of us fill uncomfortable silences with verbal filler, like, sort of, or nervous laughter. The Stoics practiced comfortable silence as a demonstration of self-command. When you finish making an important point, resist the urge to keep talking. Let the statement land fully before continuing. Fourth, shift from opinion language to observational language. Instead of, I feel like we should consider, say, based on the data, I recommend. This subtle shift positions your perspective as grounded in objective analysis rather than mere preference. Fifth, eliminate permission-seeking phrases. Phrases like, does that make sense? or, if you don't mind, position you as seeking approval rather than conveying value. If you want confirmation of understanding, rephrase as, "Have I explained that clearly?" which maintains your authority while checking for comprehension. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his journal about the importance of speech that is measured and not overflowing. He understood that verbal restraint paradoxically increases impact. Most of us say too much when seeking respect, not realizing that precision and concision naturally command more attention than verbal abundance. Let's practice transforming 5 common undermining phrases into respect-commanding alternatives. "I just wanted to ask" becomes "I'd like to know." "I'm not sure if this is right," but becomes "My analysis suggests." "This might be a silly idea" becomes "I have an unconventional approach to suggest." "I was wondering if maybe" becomes "I recommend." "I kind of disagree" becomes "I see this differently." Notice how the revised versions aren't arrogant or aggressive. They're simply clear and direct. Precision is not about dominating conversations, but about honoring your own thoughts enough to express them cleanly. The power of verbal precision becomes particularly evident when responding to interruptions or dismissals. When someone interrupts you, rather than going silent or talking over them, try this precise response: "I'd like to finish my thought." Then continue exactly where you left off. This simple, direct statement reasserts your right to complete your contribution without creating conflict. When expressing disagreement, most people either soften their position to avoid tension or become unnecessarily combative. The Stoic approach is more nuanced, expressing divergent views with clarity while maintaining connection. Try this framework. "I understand your perspective that" accurate summary of their view. "I see it differently because" your reasoning. This demonstrates both respect for their thinking and confidence in your own. One of the most powerful exercises for developing verbal precision is recording yourself in conversation and analyzing the patterns. Most of us have no idea how we actually sound to others. Set your phone to record during your next meeting or significant conversation with appropriate permission. Then listen specifically for undermining language patterns. The awareness this creates is often enough to begin shifting your speech. The ultimate goal isn't perfect speech. It's authentic expression that accurately reflects your true thinking without diminishment. As Epictetus taught, first say to yourself what you would be, then do what you have to do. Clear speech begins with clear thinking. I know what you might be thinking. Won't speaking this directly make me seem arrogant or abrasive? This is a common concern, but the opposite is usually true. Direct, precise language delivered in a calm tone is perceived as confident and trustworthy. It's qualifying, apologetic language that often creates the impression of insecurity that others find uncomfortable. The key is implementing these changes gradually. Choose one pattern to eliminate this week, perhaps the just qualifier or upward inflections. Once that shift feels natural, add another. Small, consistent changes in verbal precision create dramatic differences in how your contributions are received. A client once told me that after implementing these techniques, a colleague asked if she had received a promotion. Nothing had changed except her verbal patterns, yet others perceived an elevation in her authority. This is the invisible power of precise language. It changes how others categorize and respond to you without them even realizing why. Your voice itself, its tone, pace, and volume, also significantly impacts the respect your words command. Many of us speak too quickly when nervous or seeking approval, which undermines the weight of our message. Practice speaking about 15% more slowly than feels natural, especially when making important points. This deliberate pacing signals confidence and gives your words time to land. Volume modulation is another powerful tool. Slightly lowering your volume when making crucial points, rather than raising it as most do, often causes others to lean in and listen more attentively. This is a technique Seneca described in his writings on rhetoric, the strategic reduction of volume to increase attention. When it comes to receiving criticism or challenging feedback, our verbal response often determines whether respect increases or diminishes. The typical reactions, becoming defensive or overly apologetic, both undermine respect. Instead, try this precise response. "Thank you for that feedback. Let me consider how to address that." This acknowledgement without immediate reaction demonstrates remarkable self-command. The daily practice of verbal precision requires conscious attention until it becomes habitual. Each morning, set an intention to notice one specific language pattern you want to refine. Each evening, reflect on instances where you succeeded or reverted to old patterns. This consistent attention accelerates the transformation of your verbal presence. Remember that respect-commanding language isn't about manipulating others. It's about removing the self-diminishment that prevents your ideas from being received at full value. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "No unnecessary words or actions." When you honor your thoughts enough to express them with precision, you invite others to value them appropriately as well. Beyond words, there exists a silent language that communicates self-respect more powerfully than any speech. It's what Marcus Aurelius called dignified bearing, the physical presence that naturally commands attention and respect. Modern research confirms that up to 93% of the impression we make is determined by nonverbal signals that reveal our relationship with ourselves. Let's explore how to develop a physical presence that automatically alters how others respond to you from the very first moment. Beyond words, there exists a silent language that communicates self-respect more powerfully than any speech. It's what Marcus Aurelius called dignified bearing, the physical presence that naturally commands attention and respect. Modern research confirms that up to 93% of the impression we make is determined by non-verbal signals that reveal our relationship with ourselves. Let's explore how to develop a physical presence that automatically alters how others respond to you from the very first moment. Have you ever noticed how certain people seem to command attention the moment they enter a room? It's not about their height, appearance, or clothing. It's something more fundamental. This quality, which the Stoics understood deeply, comes from the body-mind connection that broadcasts our internal state to everyone around us. Marcus Aurelius, despite being Emperor of Rome, devoted significant attention to cultivating what he called a posture worthy of a rational being. In his personal journals, he reminded himself daily to carry himself with dignity, not for show, but as an external manifestation of internal order. He understood something modern science has only recently confirmed. Our physical posture affects both how others perceive us and how we experience ourselves. Let's try a quick experiment right now. Wherever you are, slouch your shoulders, look down, and make yourself smaller. Notice how this position makes you feel. Perhaps less confident, more hesitant. Now straighten your spine. Imagine a string pulling upward from the crown of your head and expand your posture to take up a bit more space. Feel the difference. This simple adjustment not only changes how you feel, but dramatically alters how others perceive your self-respect. The 5 fundamental elements of physical presence that communicate self-respect are posture, breathing, eye contact, gestures, and facial expression. Let's explore how each one silently broadcasts your relationship with yourself. First, posture forms the foundation of respect-commanding presence. Epictetus taught his students to stand straight, not straightened, meaning that dignified posture should be natural, not forced. Try this immediate adjustment. Imagine your head being gently pulled upward by a thread while your shoulders relax downward. This creates what researchers call confident posture. alignment that signals self-respect without arrogance. Research on first impressions reveals something fascinating. People form judgments about your confidence, competence, and status within the first 4 minutes of meeting you, and these judgments are heavily influenced by your posture. A study found that individuals who maintained aligned posture were rated 34% more credible than those with identical credentials who displayed poor posture. Second, breathing patterns subtly communicate your internal state. When we feel anxious or seeking approval, our breathing typically becomes shallow and rapid. The Stoics practiced what they called measured breathing, deliberate diaphragmatic breaths that create both internal calm and external composure. Before your next important interaction, try taking 3 deep breaths, filling your lower lungs first and exhaling completely. This not only centers you internally, but creates a visible calmness that others unconsciously register as self-command. Third, eye contact dynamics powerfully signal your comfort with yourself. Seneca wrote about the importance of a steady gaze that reflects a steady mind. Most people either avoid eye contact when feeling insecure or maintain it too intensely when trying to assert dominance. Neither commands genuine respect. Instead, practice comfortable connection, meeting others' eyes with relaxed attention when speaking important points, occasionally breaking contact naturally when gathering thoughts. Try this practice in your next conversation. Maintain eye contact when making your main points, then release it briefly when transitioning between thoughts. This rhythm creates natural connection without discomfort and signals that you're comfortable in your own skin. Fourth, your gestures reveal volumes about your relationship with yourself. Nervous, fidgety movements signal internal discomfort, while overly controlled stillness can appear rigid or unnatural. The Stoics practiced what Marcus Aurelius called economy of movement, gestures that are purposeful rather than nervous or excessive. A simple practice. For one day, commit to making your hand gestures deliberate rather than automatic. When emphasizing a point, use a measured gesture that reinforces your message rather than undermining it. Notice how this conscious awareness changes not just how you move, but how centered you feel while communicating. Fifth, facial expressions continuously broadcast your internal state. Many of us develop unconscious habits like forced smiles, furrowed brows, or nervous lip biting that undermine our presence. Epictetus advised his students to develop awareness of their facial expressions, noting that the face is a canvas on which the mind paints its state. Practice neutral awareness of your facial expressions, not controlling them artificially, but noticing and releasing tension, particularly around your eyes and jaw. I worked with someone with exceptional expertise who couldn't understand why clients seemed to doubt his recommendations. When we recorded his client meetings, the pattern became clear. Whenever he delivered important advice, he unconsciously raised his eyebrows and tilted his head slightly, creating a questioning expression that undermined his verbal certainty. Once aware of this pattern, he practiced maintaining a neutral, composed expression when delivering key points. Within weeks, client implementation of his recommendations increased dramatically. The science of physical presence explains why these adjustments create such profound changes in how others respond to you. Research in social neuroscience shows that we have specialized brain circuits dedicated to reading others' nonverbal cues, and these circuits operate largely below conscious awareness. When your physical presence signals self-respect, others' brains automatically categorize you differently, even without them consciously recognizing why. Now, let's address a common misconception. Developing powerful presence isn't about adopting aggressive power poses or dominating space. The Stoic approach is more nuanced. It's about embodying what Epictetus called natural dignity, alignment between your internal state and external expression. This authentic presence is far more respected than artificial dominance displays. Try this exercise right now to experience the difference. Stand up if you can, or sit up straight if you're already seated. Place both feet firmly on the ground, shoulder width apart. Allow your shoulders to relax down and back, creating space across your chest. Take 3 deep breaths into your lower abdomen. Notice how this position feels. Strong but not aggressive, centered but not rigid. This is the physical foundation of natural respect. Many of us develop unconscious habits that diminish our presence without realizing it. Common patterns include touching your face or hair when speaking, fidgeting with objects, hunching shoulders, crossing arms tightly against your chest, or making yourself physically smaller in group settings. These behaviors subtly signal discomfort with occupying space or drawing attention. Spend one day simply observing these patterns in yourself, without judgment. Awareness itself often begins the transformation process. Then choose one pattern to consciously modify, such as replacing face touching with keeping your hands calmly at your sides or in your lap. Here's a 5-minute daily practice that can dramatically develop your presence. Stand in front of a mirror in the aligned posture we discussed. Speak aloud on any topic that matters to you for 3 minutes, maintaining this physical alignment while practicing deliberate gestures and steady eye contact with yourself. This brief daily practice builds the neural pathways that make composed presence your default state, rather than something you have to remember in important moments. The effect of improved physical presence on respect dynamics is often immediate and dramatic. One professional I worked with discovered she habitually tilted her head and raised her voice at the end of declarative statements, making them sound like questions. After 2 weeks of practicing aligned posture and deliberate speech patterns, she reported that her medical recommendations were being followed much more consistently. Nothing had changed except how she physically presented her expertise. Marcus Aurelius faced this challenge daily as emperor. Court life was filled with people trying to read his reactions and gain advantage through his responses. He practiced what he called imperturbability, a physical steadiness that revealed nothing he didn't choose to reveal. This wasn't emotional suppression, but conscious choice about what his body communicated. You can develop this capacity through what I call the emotional weather practice. Throughout your day, imagine your emotions as weather passing through the sky of your awareness. Notice them without becoming them. Feel anger or insecurity arising? Rather than expressing it automatically through your face and body, observe it while maintaining physical composure. This creates the space to choose your response rather than having it chosen by emotional reactivity. The body-mind connection works both ways. Just as your thoughts affect your posture, deliberately adjusting your posture affects your thoughts. Research shows that maintaining aligned posture for even 2 minutes increases testosterone, associated with confidence, and decreases cortisol, associated with stress. This hormonal shift not only changes how you feel, but alters how you think and communicate. Before your next challenging interaction, whether a difficult conversation, presentation, or meeting, take 30 seconds to adjust your physical alignment. Stand or sit with your spine straight but not rigid, shoulders relaxed, breathing deep and steady. This brief physical reset creates an internal state that supports composed presence rather than reactive insecurity. Applying these principles in different contexts requires small adjustments. In presentations, focus on grounded stillness when making key points rather than nervous pacing. In one-on-one conversations, practice the balance of connection and autonomy, maintaining eye contact without staring, sitting upright without rigidity. In group settings, occupy your physical space comfortably rather than trying to become smaller or less visible. The most powerful demonstration of physical presence comes when facing challenging situations. When criticized or questioned, most people unconsciously display submission signals, hunching, looking down, speaking more quickly. Practice maintaining your aligned posture, especially in these moments, not as resistance or aggression, but as continued self-respect regardless of external circumstances. Seneca wrote about this quality. The greatest thing is to have a mind that rises above injuries. This rising above is both metaphorical and literal. Maintaining physical dignity, even when facing disrespect, communicates profound self-command that naturally generates respect from others. Remember that developing powerful presence isn't about becoming someone else. It's about removing the physical habits that prevent others from seeing who you truly are. As Epictetus taught, first say to yourself what you would be, then do what you have to do. Your physical presence should reflect your authentic self at its most composed, rather than attempting to project an artificial image. The transformation isn't immediate. It's a practice that deepens over time. Each day, choose one aspect of physical presence to focus on, whether it's posture while sitting in meetings, breathing during stressful conversations, or eye contact when expressing important ideas. This consistent attention gradually rewires your default patterns until dignified presence becomes your natural way of being, rather than something you have to remember. We arrive now at the most profound and transformative element of Stoic philosophy regarding respect, what Epictetus called the final liberation. It's the understanding that true respect comes not from being respected by others, but from a radically different relationship with your very need for approval. This perspective shift is so powerful that when truly internalized, it permanently transforms how others respond to you. Let me show you how this final piece completes your transformation. We've now arrived at what Epictetus called the final liberation, perhaps the most profound insight the Stoics discovered about respect. It's a perspective shift so powerful that when truly internalized, it permanently transforms not just how others respond to you, but your entire relationship with the concept of respect itself. What if I told you that the ultimate secret to commanding genuine respect is to transcend your need for it altogether? This might sound paradoxical at first. After all, we've spent 9 chapters discussing how to earn more respect from others. But the Stoics understood something that modern psychology has only recently begun to appreciate. True freedom comes not from securing others' good opinion, but from breaking free from your dependence on it. Epictetus, who began life as a slave, someone literally owned by others, wrote perhaps the most liberating words in all of philosophy: "Only the educated are free." By educated, he didn't mean formally schooled, but rather those who understand what is and isn't within their control. He continued with the profound insight: he is free who lives as he wishes to live, who is neither subject to compulsion, nor to hindrance, nor to force, whose movements are unimpeded, whose desires attain their purpose, and who does not fall into what he would avoid. Think about that for a moment. How much of your life is spent trying to avoid disapproval or gain appreciation? How often do you modify your authentic self to fit others' expectations? Take 5 seconds right now to recall a recent situation where you compromised your true thoughts or feelings to maintain someone else's good opinion. Got it? That moment represents precisely what the Stoics would call a surrender of your freedom. The paradox the Stoics discovered is that when you truly no longer need others' respect to feel secure in your worth, you naturally receive more genuine respect than ever before. This isn't manipulation or reverse psychology. It's the natural response to encountering someone who stands in their truth without needing validation. Such presence is so rare in our approval-seeking culture that it naturally commands attention and regard. Marcus Aurelius, despite being Emperor of Rome, perhaps the most respected position in the ancient world, constantly reminded himself of the insignificance of others' opinions. In his private journals he wrote, It never ceases to amaze me. We all love ourselves more than other people, but care more about their opinion than our own. He recognized that this preoccupation with external validation was not just psychologically unhealthy, it was logically inconsistent. Let me share a personal example that might resonate with you. Imagine you've worked for weeks on a presentation that you believe contains valuable insights. The day comes, you deliver it with passion, and afterward, most people offer positive feedback, except for one person who criticizes your approach. Where does your mind focus? If you're like most people, that one negative comment outweighs all the positive responses, dominating your thoughts and emotional state. This common experience reveals our unhealthy relationship with external validation. The Stoics would ask, why give a stranger such power over your internal state? Why allow one person's opinion to override both your own judgment and the positive responses of many others? This isn't rational, it's emotional dependency. The concept of eudaimonia, flourishing or true happiness independent of external circumstances, is central to understanding the Stoic approach to respect. Unlike our modern concept of happiness as an emotional state dependent on favorable conditions, eudaimonia represents a deeper contentment that persists regardless of how others perceive or treat you. Try this perspective-shifting exercise right now. Imagine the most respected person you know personally. Now imagine them being completely disrespected, perhaps ignored in a meeting or having their ideas dismissed. Does that momentary disrespect actually diminish their worth or competence? Of course not. Their value remains unchanged regardless of others' recognition of it. Now apply that same understanding to yourself. Your worth doesn't fluctuate based on others' acknowledgement of it. The Stoics practiced what I call the cosmic perspective exercise to release attachment to others' opinions. Marcus Aurelius would regularly remind himself of the vastness of time and space, writing, "All of us are creatures of a day, the rememberer and the remembered alike." From this expanded perspective, how significant is any particular person's opinion of you at any given moment? Spend 30 seconds right now imagining zooming out from your current location, seeing your home, your neighborhood, your city, continent, the Earth, solar system, galaxy, and beyond. From this cosmic perspective, how important is that moment when someone spoke over you in yesterday's meeting? This isn't about dismissing your experiences as meaningless, but rather about right-sizing them to reduce their emotional grip on you. Developing an identity based on values rather than validation represents the heart of this Stoic liberation. When your sense of self is anchored in your principles rather than others' perceptions, you gain a stability that's impossible to achieve through external approval. This isn't about becoming indifferent to others. It's about ensuring that your worth isn't contingent on their recognition. I've worked with people who transformed their entire presence by shifting their focus from "Am I being respected?" to "Am I living according to my values?" This seemingly subtle shift creates a profound change in how they carry themselves through the world. When you're no longer monitoring others' responses for validation, you become more present, more authentic, and paradoxically, more respected. A powerful technique for developing this liberation is what the Stoics called premeditatio malorum, negative visualization. Epictetus taught his students to imagine the worst possible scenario of rejection or disrespect, and then to find the internal resources to maintain their equanimity even in that situation. Let's practice this right now. Imagine the worst plausible scenario of disrespect you might face, perhaps being publicly criticized, having an idea dismissed, or being overlooked for recognition you deserve. Allow yourself to feel the discomfort of that scenario fully. Now ask yourself, even in this situation, what remains within my control? What values can I continue to embody, regardless of how I'm treated? This practice doesn't eliminate discomfort, but it creates a profound shift in your relationship with the need for approval. I know someone who rebuilt their entire identity after experiencing a public failure that resulted in significant criticism. Rather than trying to regain approval through people-pleasing or defensive positioning, they focused entirely on reconnecting with their core values and expressing them consistently through their work. Within a year, they had gained more genuine respect than they had before the failure, not because they were trying to be respected, but because they were embodying principles that naturally command respect. The practical application of this philosophical perspective comes when you encounter situations where respect seems to be withheld or denied. Most people either become defensive, fighting for respect, or deferential, abandoning self-respect to gain approval. The liberated Stoic approach is radically different. Maintain your principles and composure regardless of external validation. Imagine you're in a meeting and someone dismisses your idea without consideration. The typical responses, either pushing back aggressively or withdrawing in hurt, both reflect attachment to external validation. The liberated response might be, "I've shared my perspective based on my analysis. I'm open to different viewpoints and also confident in the reasoning behind my recommendation." This response demonstrates both openness and self-respect without being dependent on others' agreement. Seneca offers particularly valuable guidance on handling criticism. When faced with critical feedback, he advised considering the content before the intention. Even if it is offered with unfriendly intention, consider whether there might be truth in it that could benefit you. This approach transforms criticism from a threat to your worth into potential information for growth. This doesn't mean becoming a passive recipient of disrespect. The Stoics were not doormats. They often took bold stands against injustice and spoke truth to power. The difference is that their actions stemmed from principle rather than insecurity. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." When you respond to disrespect with dignity rather than reactivity, you demonstrate a freedom that the disrespectful person doesn't possess. All the techniques we've explored in previous chapters, from the dichotomy of control to cognitive questioning to verbal precision, support this ultimate liberation. They're not just tools for gaining respect, but stepping stones toward freedom from the need for it. When you can maintain your composure regardless of others' behavior, speak with clarity regardless of others' reception, and question limiting interpretations regardless of apparent disrespect, you're already practicing this liberation. The 30-day plan for implementing these principles begins with honest assessment of your current relationship with external validation. Each morning, ask yourself, in what situations do I most seek approval? What would it look like to act from principle rather than for validation in those moments? Each evening, review how you did, celebrating moments of internal freedom rather than external validation. Week 1 focuses on applying the dichotomy of control to respect situations. Week 2 centers on developing composed responses to disrespect through premeditatio malorum. Week 3 emphasizes cultivating value-based presence rather than approval-seeking behaviors. Week 4 integrates all these practices into a new relationship with respect itself, one based on self-sovereignty rather than external validation. What makes this approach so powerful is that it's not a technique or manipulation. It's a fundamental shift in how you relate to yourself and others. The respect that follows isn't generated by impressing others or managing their perceptions, but by embodying qualities that naturally command respect: integrity, composure, clarity, and principle. I want to emphasize that this liberation doesn't mean becoming cold or disconnected from others. The Stoics valued deep human connection and contribution to community. The difference is that these connections are entered freely rather than as a means of securing validation. When you no longer need others to respect you in order to respect yourself, your relationships actually become more authentic and meaningful. The transformation you'll experience through this process extends far beyond how others treat you. You'll notice a profound shift in your internal experience of the world. Situations that once triggered anxiety about how you're being perceived will become opportunities to express your values. The constant background worry about others' judgments gradually dissolves, replaced by a steadiness that persists regardless of external circumstances. As we conclude this journey, I invite you to remember what Marcus Aurelius wrote. The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. When you free yourself from the need for others' respect, you reclaim the power to define your worth on your own terms. This isn't just philosophical theory. It's practical freedom that transforms how you move through the world every day. The respect you've been seeking was never something others could give you. It was always your relationship with yourself made visible. By implementing these psychological principles derived from ancient wisdom, you've discovered how to command genuine respect not through manipulation or dominance, but through authentic alignment with your highest self. This is the ultimate paradox and the greatest gift of Stoic philosophy. True respect from others arrives precisely when you no longer need it.